All right, everyone. Well, welcome to another edition of the Unpredictable Pipeline. In this series, we are featuring marketing leaders who have helped pivot their teams, their companies, and in many cases, their industries through the headwinds of 2020. And very excited to have with us today Shawn McKee from WebPT. And Shawn, thank you very much for joining us on LinkedIn Live.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Really happy to be here.
So I've got a handful of questions based on our last conversation. If anyone watching live has questions as well, please feel free to throw those in the comments, and we'll get those to Shawn. Maybe just start with just letting people know, for those that don't know WebPT, what is the company, who is your audience, and then maybe a little bit of like what were some of those immediate shifts that happened, at the end of Q1 of this year.
Yeah, so WebPT is a software platform for physical therapists, focusing in the outpatient space. So providing electronic medical records, practice management, revenue cycle management, marketing, patient engagement for outpatient rehab facilities. Market leader in the space, so we're definitely a niche in healthcare, but have really gotten a foothold as the market leader there. And one of the things we built our entire marketing around was thought leadership, right? Inbound marketing and really providing value to the market. We saw a real gap in our industry for helping these providers run their business. They all go to school to become doctors of physical therapy, and they're great at patient care, but maybe not so much at running their small business. And so we provide a lot of that content and expertise on our blog and our white papers and webinars. And so for us, the good news is we had built that engine prior, that we were providing value, that we were thought leaders, that we had the market, the physical therapists, the office managers, people like that coming to our blog to get information. So, when COVID hit, obviously our regularly scheduled programming went right out the window, and instead of our nice, well-planned content calendar, we switched very quickly to focus on how to help keep these small to mid-sized practices, and large practices too. They have a little bit more of contingency plans than some of the SMB do. But how to keep their businesses running, things they could do. There are all sorts of changes happening quickly from CMS and Medicare and Medicaid, and so we ultimately converted what was this well-organized content machine into more of a newsroom format. So any breaking news on payments and what's happening with telehealth, different things that were happening around the PPP, just really quickly pivoted and focused and had our team working. We like to bring in kind of reform journalists. We find they're fantastic content writers. So we had a few people on our team tapping into their journalist roots and really going back to that newsroom format and responding. And we saw one of the highest month, I think it was April, for visits to our blog that we've ever had. And those 2 months, March and April, we had record number of webinar attendees. So more in those, we had 3 in those 2 months, and it was more than we had the entire year prior. So there was a hunger for that information and how to respond and how to keep the doors open and be able to, build for telehealth and do those different things. And so those were some of the quick shifts we made.
Well, I think there may be sort of a thin line between a buyer-centric content strategy and a newsroom format, right? And I think that, to your point, like you've got a customer that isn't always an MBA, isn't someone that is sort of a professional runner of a business. You've got someone who's passionate about a function and now has to run a business around it. So to be able to provide that and expertise, I mean, that feels like a sustainable strategy. As you guys think about sort of your content strategy into 2021, is that newsroom discipline going to continue? And then how do you balance that with, what was appropriately part of your editorial strategy beforehand as well?
Yeah, so we keep a lot of that going, and we're a little bit used to it because every Q4 we get the final rule for Medicare, and so you got to kind of scramble to educate. I mean, it's usually, I don't know, 1,400 page document somewhere in that range that most people aren't going to read. So we pour over that and try to translate that. So we do keep that running and keep that piece in place as we think about our longer term themes and goals. But things have changed so much now. A lot of things we've talked about in the past, right? Digital care and telehealth and touchless patient intake and those type of things just have gotten accelerated through this process. So people need to know quickly how they can implement that in their practice and their business.
The other thing that you were doing pre-COVID is a lot of in-person meetings, getting together with groups of physical therapists and sort of talking about sort of how you can help them. Obviously, those in-person meetings are now at least temporarily gone. What has it been like trying to shift those into digital meetings? What's worked and what maybe hasn't worked?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we focus on two segments, SMB and then enterprise, right? Like a lot of companies do. And what we found is the thought leadership and building those relationships work differently in those two segments. In the SMB, we can do it almost exclusively digitally, and in enterprise, it was really more in person. So doing what we would call road shows and meeting with a dozen or 24 people and having dinner and talking about the industry. So we had a bunch of those planned for this year. They had gone great last year, so we tripled the number we were going to do. And then I think 2 weeks before we were going to do our first one, COVID shut everything down. So we looked at kind of, again, responding and providing value. And so we, as the market leader, we have a ton of internal data in our application around what's happening with visit volumes, state by state, and then looking at things like telehealth, who's using more telehealth visits, things like that. And so we were able to create a report that we shared out to a couple hundred enterprise prospects and customers that really just talked about what we're seeing state by state, what trends we're seeing, and giving them sort of a state of the industry and how it's being hit by COVID, right. Which got really great responses because they can sort of benchmark themselves against what's happening in their state, what's happening in the country. And so that was really useful to kind of keep the conversation going. The other thing we did is we switched to what we're calling executive briefings, which are really they're kind of a mix up between a digital event and a webinar. So we bring on a couple of guests. We have a conversation about what's happening, and then we break out into some smaller groups and talk about whatever specific topics they want. And we had really great response to that. And I think it's been really good for building top of funnel connection and thought leadership and brand awareness there. The piece we're looking at now and what we're missing from events is that deeper connection to the sales rep, the conversations you have after dinner, the one-on-one conversations where you go out for drinks after the event, or whatever it is, some of that more mid-funnel relationship building, I think, is the piece we're still working on and trying to figure out, because we know we're not planning on anything in Q1 in person. We're hoping to get back sort of mid to late Q2, but we have to have our contingency plans, right, and be ready to switch everything to digital then as well.
Yeah, we did. I did just a quick LinkedIn survey beginning of last week and just asked, okay, like, when do you expect your company to start doing in-person events again, whether it's producing in-person events or going to in-person events? And like, what did the data say? It was like something like 17% said first half of next year. Half of approximately the respondents said second half, and 30% said 2022. Yeah. And so I think, it doesn't reflect to me the necessarily a pessimism. It's just the reality of we don't know, when it's going to be safe. It's one thing to say, I'm going to produce an event. It's another thing to say, I'm going to go to an event. I'm going to get on a plane and go stand close to each other in the sponsor happy hour again. That feels like it's a little further out. And physical therapists, I mean, like their very job sort of reflects this already as well, and so there's a comfortability that baked into some of that that is certainly interesting. Well, listen, I don't want to take up a ton more of your time, Shawn. As you think about next year, the things you have learned this year, the pivots you've made, it sounds like you're going to continue to leverage the newsroom idea, which, Elizabeth, you said it as well. It's just a brilliant idea to sort of, to do that and to continue that. Are there other pivots or other things you're thinking about for 2021, knowing that we're going to still remain in sort of a hybrid format for a while?
Yeah, I think for us, we've proven that we can do a lot of these things digitally. We had our annual conference. We did that digitally last month. I think we're just taking all of those things that we learned and were forced to do this year and moving those into next year as part of our kind of overall strategy, and sort of running sort of those two jointly, right? Hoping to get back to some in person, but recognizing we have to have the digital plan underneath, and just continuing to provide that value and help people grow their businesses and get back to normal.
Well, we'll get there eventually. And in the meantime, Shawn, thanks so much for joining us today. Shawn McKee from WebPT. Thanks for joining us and sharing a little bit about what unpredictable pipeline has looked like for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.